All right, with our Friday Five, we begin with issue number one, and Joseph Joey Tort's-Ready, you're on the clock.
Thanks, Rob. First I want to say it's no surprise to me that my pal John Hardy is one of the local leaders with regard to the relief efforts for southern West Virginia. So kudos to him. And it's hard following Ken Reed, who golf clap here. I certainly applaud his appearance on the show this morning and the clear-eyed way he explained some of these issues surrounding the vaccination policies in West Virginia. I thought that was very enlightening, to say the least.
Cool.
Without further delay, let me get into my topic, Rob, which is I recall a show, Rob, that we had back in 2014. You were still in the old studio, and I was outside the studio waiting to come on, and I was talking with Craig Blair. And this was during the heady days when the Republicans were just taking over West Virginia state government. And Craig pulled out a picture of himself and Governor Sam Brownback from the state of Kansas. He had just been at a conference somewhere in the Midwest, and he met the governor of Kansas and was extolling the virtues of the changes in tax policy that were taking place in the state of Kansas. And he was telling me how he envisioned this for the state of West Virginia in the future. Well, we know what happened in Kansas. Starting in 2011, they began significant cuts of state taxes, taking it from 6.5%, a high tax rate for state income tax, down to 3.5% eventually over the course of a couple of years. Sounds a little bit familiar. People like Art Laffer and Stephen Moore, who are economists currently hanging around the White House, they were kind of the architects of what was going on in Kansas. And Kansas was considered to be kind of a crucible for other states to model themselves after in terms of tax policy. Well, in Kansas, the story turned sour in a hurry. While initially there were reports of revenue increases due to these tax reductions, eventually revenues dried up and education couldn't be funded. Other state agencies could not be funded. And a Republican legislature in Kansas reversed course and repealed a lot of the tax cuts over Governor Brownback's veto to restore some of the revenue generators that were necessary for Kansas to run their state government. I was thinking about this situation and that discussion with Craig Blair when Eric Tarr was on your show, Rob, just 2 days ago, or maybe it was yesterday. I kind of lose track of time.
Yesterday.
And implicit in what Eric Tarr was talking about he was foreshadowing, in my mind, some real significant fiscal problems that the state of West Virginia is going to face in the future. And I started looking around at some stories that have been recently bubbling up about West Virginia, and I see PEIA currently $900 million required to fund that program, projected to go to $1.6 billion in just the next 5 years. Hope Scholarship, $25 million starting out when we initiated that program, projected to go to $300 million in the next 5 years. Eric Tarr said yesterday, quote, spending is out of control on Hope Scholarship. Medicaid, we are now seeing the feds projecting that they're going to have to cut Medicaid dollars going to the states. I can only imagine the impact that's going to happen in West Virginia if that takes place. And then we also know that in West Virginia, there are other potential revenue shortfalls on the horizon. We've got an aging and increasingly unwell population that's going to require more social services to get by in the future. We still have teachers paid at the rate of 49th or 50th in the country. And the feds are talking about eliminating the U.S. Department of Education. And, of course, they're saying all the federal education dollars will go to the states. Look, the idea behind eliminating that department is to save money. So we're not going to get potentially all the money we used to get for education. So we've got a situation in West Virginia, which is now already facing a $400 million deficit, we've got a situation that this Governor Justice rocket ride that we're supposed to be on could soon come crashing to earth. And we might have a situation where we're going to be very short on money, much like Kansas was in the middle 2000s. So my question this morning for the panel is, because I'm wondering if we've got the wherewithal in West Virginia to respond in the way that Kansas did. Am I overstating concerns about West Virginia's near-term fiscal problems that are on the horizon? And secondly, for discussion this morning, is the feeling there that our legislature has the wherewithal to respond in ways that can fix revenue shortfalls with so many avowed anti-taxers? And we see them coming forward even in discussing the local 1% tax in the county. Are these folks going to be equipped and able to raise revenue, if necessary, just to balance the books in this state? That's what I'm wondering about this morning. I wonder what other people have to think.
Well, nobody, and I mean nobody, understands taxes better than the former tax commissioner of the state of West Virginia, Michael Carl.
Well, thank you for that comment. But based on what I know, West Virginia has, and I'm sure it's far worse than Kansas was or is, wasteful government spending in the way it's just the bureaucracy and the duplication and all kinds of waste. And when you cut the tax rates, you raise the revenue stream, and that's what is happening. And I don't have a concern that we can handle what we're facing and can do it without reinstating the higher income taxes. And I think we can actually continue with some proper revenue triggers the reduction. I put out something called the Fair 55 plan, which was that you have a consumption, a broad-based sales tax, 5.5%. You keep the socially important exemptions, for food and stuff like that, but you enforce it adequately, and you eliminate a lot of unneeded exemptions and deductions for sales tax that we have now, and you can reduce and ultimately eliminate the income tax, and you can do it without losing revenue.
And that part of that was a broader base of things being taxed with sales tax, correct, Mike?
Yes, exactly. At 5.5%, I just had called it the 5.5 solution, but that the numbers I work with, just taking some historic numbers and applying the concepts, but you keep like I said, you keep the important, socially important exemptions, on food and medical services and things like that.
Mr. Schultz, I suspect you have a counter argument.
Yes. We had an awful big federal tax cut in 2017 that nevertheless resulted in the 4 years of the largest deficit increases or U.S. debt increases in American history.
That was because of the incredible cost of COVID.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
The actual
COVID started 9 months before Trump left office.
Revenues.
You've been blaming that for far too long.
Federal revenues were up after the 2017 income tax
piling on debt.
Well, let's let Larry finish his point.
So there's a whole bunch of reasons why I do not believe the point that Mike made about how these tax cuts increase revenues. They're also saying that a tax increase on the food that ordinary West Virginians buy will also increase revenues. I don't buy these things in a state where we're underwater in a bunch of ways and there's a bunch of threats out there waiting for us, as Joe talked about. I've got some related issues, but one of the things that Medicaid cuts are going to do is badly injure our hospital system. And I am thinking, put our nursing home system on death row. That's a terrible way to put it, but I don't believe our nursing homes are going to survive much of a Medicaid and Medicare cut at all. And that is going to be a terrible challenge for people who are now paying 5.5% sales tax on their cars and the other stuff they buy, because those old folks are not going to be able to go to other states when their nursing home goes bankrupt. They're coming home. And they are not going to have the expertise. People are not going to have the expertise in their home to take care of them. So to go back to Joe's point, I think there are challenges for this state budget, the likes of which our state has never seen right now. There are 33,000 federal employees who live in this state. A bunch of them are going to lose their jobs. Every single one of them pays state income tax. And they're not going to be paying any state income tax when they lose their jobs or see a pay cut.
Mr. Gilstrap.
Ever since I have moved here and started doing this show, I have always felt that in fiscal matters, when we've talked to Craig Blair and we've talked to all of these players, I talked to Governor Morrissey about this a couple of days ago, I get the sense that nobody's dealing off the top of the deck. We've gone from billion-dollar surpluses to a $400 million deficit, which will grow to a $600 million deficit unless the new governor comes in and does something heroic. Part of that feels like politicking to me. Part of that feels like we're cooking the books, make it look worse than it is, and then I'll come in and fix it. But I don't know. I don't know how anybody can possibly, on the Hope Scholarship, to miss the mark by $275 million. That's a big miss. I chastised Jefferson County for losing $4 million. This is $275 million. I don't have a crystal ball for this. I'm actually not enough. I haven't been in this state long enough to really have a finger on the pulse. But I do know when the game feels rigged, and the game has felt rigged from the very beginning. I don't know how we get here.
Mr. Valente.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I will say that it's kind of a lies, damn lies, and statistics type deal. Mm-hmm. The people that create the books, look, if people who did government accounting did it in the private sector, they'd be going to jail. I mean, that's just plain and simple. The way that they've manipulated the books, how Governor Justice at the time would talk, poetically about I just messed with the camera. Would talk poetically about the revenues that we were getting mainly from COVID money, and that's drying up. And we're now, we're on a track right now. We're on a train track heading towards fiscal disaster in so many different ways. Not just bad revenue projections, but workforce reductions here in the state of West Virginia. The knock-on effect those workforce reductions will have with local businesses, especially here in the Eastern Panhandle. It's not just federal workers, but federal contractors that are based out of the Eastern Panhandle as well. Those businesses that depend on those people spending their dollars at their business. The knock-on effects that are going to destroy the revenue base of West Virginia, plus the fact that West Virginia is a massive taker of federal dollars. We got to get our fiscal house in order, and we've got to figure out what is absolutely necessary right now. And I know we've talked about it here. We know that education is necessary. We know fixes to foster care are necessary. Is it necessary that we give massive tax breaks to corporations just to relocate here? I don't think so. I think, learning how to adjust our licensure so that people can learn how to serve one another and not have to go broke just complying with the licenses that they have to get in the state of West Virginia to be able to form small businesses. That's the key to sustainable growth, sustainable tax bases here in the state of West Virginia. And we're going to have some dark times coming, just from budget cuts and the impact to revenue. That we've already lost 200 workers in Parkersburg. They're coming.
Federal building in Parkersburg. You're talking about?
The federal building in Parkersburg, where the dark times are coming, and you need to prepare for it, because and it doesn't matter if you have nothing. You think you have nothing to do with the federal government or nothing to do with the state government. These impacts will hit you from all different angles.
Joe, comes back to you for the final minute.
Well, John Gilstrap, it's funny, John, you raised the issue about not dealing from the top of the deck and not knowing the actual numbers. And it's in Kansas, there was fuzzy math about their revenue estimates and what money they were bringing in on an annual basis. And in fact, Paul Krugman wrote an article in 2015, I believe, for the New York Times. Now, Paul is wrong about a lot of things, but on this he was right on. He said that the storm clouds were coming for Kansas, and they did show up. I think there's two main issues in West Virginia which has me concerned about the future in terms of the fiscal shape of our state.
30 seconds, Joe.
Okay, sure. Number one is PEIA. Look, the governor's budget includes no state pay raises. We've already gone to the well once with premium increases just last year. I don't know how we continue to balance that situation. And secondly, the ravages of the opioid situation, that bill's coming due. And the folks who rely on social services are going to be many because of that situation. And I think the state's not equipped to handle both of those big drivers of costs going forward.
Thank you, Joe. Good leadoff position. Mr. Valente, you're on the clock with issue number 2. Also by the Mansion Ferretti Law Offices in Martinsburg. Joe, if you're not muted, you can take it from here on this one.
Thank you about the mute button.
You're welcome.
Yes.
I know the pain.
I wonder what are you doing that you need to mute it? You know,
Man's got an hour and a half on the phone. A man's got to go.
Well, Larry, I just had a discussion with my wife that certainly would not want to be on the air.
You remember?
Sorry, I probed too far.
That was a discussion.
Ouch.
Sorry. Not going there.
Yeah.
Anyhow, we're located downtown Martinsburg. Questions about personal injury or insurance claims, call us at 264-8505 or visit us on the web, wvjusticelawyers.com.
Thank you, Joe. Also brought to you by WVU Medicine, Berkeley Medical Center, Jefferson Medical Center. The Friday Five is Joseph Joey Torts, ready via telephone. Also, New York Times best-selling author John Gilstrap. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
Senior member of our crew, Mr. Michael Carl.
Morning.
You heard his voice previously. Mr. Lawrence Schultz, attorney at law.
Great to be here.
And with issue number 2 in the Bill Stubblefield Admiral Chair, it's David Valente.
Yes, a much higher admiral chair than I started out with last week, so I feel much better. We talked in the first segment about the state and the state's ability to generate revenue. Yes, the budget right now is in reconciliation, and the final numbers are not there. There are cuts that are going to happen. The Trump administration has proposed it, has promised it. They're moving forward in reductions in force in the federal workforce. They're moving forward with other cuts, in couched as cost-saving measures. Many West Virginians, the stat that I've seen is, like Medicare and Medicaid, like 30% of West Virginians are on one of those benefits. Many West Virginians, as an aging population, are on Social Security. Many West Virginians are on some sort of federal assistance. And it's not just people who are receiving federal assistance. I alluded to in the first segment the local businesses who derive a lot of their revenue from people who receive some sort of either income from federal service or from federal benefits will be impacted by those cuts. Small business loans, the speed at which a small business loan could be granted will be impacted as well. Whether we give small business loans out in the future is also a concern. Does the average West Virginian at this point understand the fiscal storm that is coming to the Eastern Panhandle, to West Virginia at large, just so that First Daddy Alanya and his tech bros can save a little money at tax time?
All right. I won't start with Joe because he led off the last segment with some explanation of that, but I will go to Mr. John Gilstrap.
Does the average West Virginian understand? I have no idea. Do I think that there are hard times coming? Probably. Do I think that there's only two ways for this to go, right? Either the mayhem is going to give way to structure, and this is some wild strategy that's going to work itself out in a Trumpian kind of way, because we are bleeding to death financially as a nation. I mean, that we have to do structural big cuts to make this happen, and there's no painless way to do that. So it will work, and the Republicans will be heroes, or the Republicans are going to hand the Democrats the reins of power for the next 2 decades. I don't see a middle ground on this. I think it's a mistake to go face on fire, Orange Man burning the world down with every decision that's made, because Trump does not share, giving him the benefit of the doubt, Trump does not share his long-term strategies. If we look at what has transpired in Ukraine, which is just kind of as a sideline, it worked. Not the peace part of it, but in terms of, you say really ugly things about Zelensky, and then you go through this minerals deal, and then when it all settles out, now he's making nice-ish with Zelensky, and we have the mineral deal. There's a way that these things work through Trump's head. Now, as far as West Virginians are concerned, do they know? That's your basic question. No, I don't think they do. But I guess we'll see. As far as, I don't think there's a lot of sympathy for the fired federal workers, but you need to go to that next step, that for every fired federal worker, there's a fired contractor for federal workers. And then there's the lady in the cafeteria that serves the federal worker that's not going to have that federal worker to feed. So therefore she's going to get laid off too. So there is a ripple effect for all this. How far that goes, I don't know.
That second part about the contractors, John, is even more fascinating, because there's 2.3 million federal workers. There's 5 million contractors, was the story that I heard yesterday. And each one of those contractors has a payroll that's made up of people that get paychecks from that contractor, that go and shop, that go and spend, that go and do this or that. A study I saw about the Trump steel tariffs in his first term was that it created 1 million additional jobs in the U.S. steel industry, the tariffs that he invoked during his first term. But it created a loss of 10 million jobs in related industries otherwise due to the tariffs. Now, I don't know who did the study. I don't know what the details of the study were, and you're certainly free to question any study information that you hear. But that was one economic study that came from, do tariffs work and in what ways? So the contractor point, I think, is a very good one. And your other point, I think, is a fair one, too. Generally speaking, most people don't have sympathy for people who are being fired unless you're the person, or you're someone you're related to was fired. I think that's, generally speaking, pretty true, because it happens to somebody else, not you. Mr. Schultz.
Yes, one of the reasons I agree that West Virginians do not see this storm coming, and one of the reasons they do not see this storm coming is they don't have elected representatives on the state or federal level who are talking about the coming storm. So, for example, on this radio show, there are House of Delegates members who occasionally call in. There are people who appear here as hosts. I have never heard any of them. I have never heard Shelley Moore Capito. I have never heard any of our congressional delegation address this issue to the people of West Virginia. Those of us who dig into this stuff and treat it as a sort of a hobby, yeah, we know there's a hammer coming. Why aren't our elected officials, who are all from one party, I might add, telling us, hey, get ready, batten down the hatches, we're about to see a hammer get dropped on our state? I don't know. I could make some guesses. One of them would be they don't want to take the blame, but that's a short-term strategy. You know, we were talking about Mr. Trump not telling us his long-term strategies. These people are, by their behavior, telling us their short-term strategies, and that is, I don't want to get in this. I don't want to be blamed for this. Well, it's far too late for that. When this hammer hits, if it does, and I do believe there's at least a chance that it won't be as bad as we think, when it hits, then there's going to be another thing. I never said anything to my constituents about it. I knew it was probably coming, but there will be another thing where they sort of say, well, I had no idea this was going to happen. Part of the value of this show is we're saying, yes, you do have some idea, and if you don't, you're not paying attention well enough to do your job. So regardless of the party they're in, I want to hear more from our state and federal elected officials about what these cuts are going to mean for the lives of the people they represent.
Now, in defense of the elected officials who've been on the show, I will say this. Without specific information, there's not a whole lot that they can prepare for because these people work on dollar amounts, not theory.
Right.
And so in their defense, we asked Jason Barrett, who's the Senate Finance Chair, about it in a previous appearance, and he said, I'm busy working on things that we know about. I don't have time to speculate on things I don't have information on. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of what he said. I asked Larry Pack, the state's treasurer, about the Chinese tariffs on West Virginia coal, and his response effectively was, we don't really know what that effect will be, but we believe President Trump will take care of West Virginia. I'm paraphrasing that President Trump wouldn't allow West Virginia to be hurt. As for everybody else along the way, I think they fall into those same categories. We've not had Congressman Riley Moore or Senator Shelley Capito or Jim Justice on the show since Inauguration Day. That's not my decision, by the way. And now I'll go to Michael Carr. There you go, Mike.
Well, one of the important things to consider in trying to come up with a plan to reduce government spending, federal government spending ways, is to distinguish between the nature and the basis of some of the major expenditures. Medicare is based on money you paid before. Social Security is based on money you paid before. Medicaid is not. So you need to, factor in those fundamental, distinctions in terms of, how to cut, what to cut. I mean, clearly a huge part of the waste is just the process waste, the fact that, people are paid and they're not doing anything that's helpful, or there's no end to the waste. But the connection between what taxpayers, citizens put in and get back needs to be respected.
Mr. Ferretti.
Well, to get David's question was from a West Virginia perspective, do we realize what's coming down the road? And I would say there's still probably politically a fair number of people who are applauding what's going on at the federal level with cuts and furloughs and terminations. But I also think there's probably a fair number who are concerned about whether West Virginia is equipped to handle the federal government changes that we see developing before our eyes. As Ken Reed accurately stated, we are a taker state. And so, part of my theme this morning with my topic was, are we equipped to handle these coming changes? And I question whether we are. And I'll give you one example with Medicaid. It's undefined yet as to what level of cuts are coming and how much money on a statewide basis we're going to be losing with Medicaid funding. That's yet not defined, but one of the things you see developing is a work requirement in order to qualify for Medicaid. So the question I would have in West Virginia is, where are all these Medicaid recipients going to find jobs? Not everybody can work at Nucor. So it's a real problem that's going to happen. And what they're projecting, of course, is that a lot of these folks are either going to be unwilling or unable to find a job that qualifies them for continued Medicaid coverage. In other words, then they are lopped off the rolls of Medicaid and problem solved. We have much less Medicaid recipients. But these people are still going to require health care. They're still going to have injuries and medical conditions that require treatment. And they're going to be going to clinics and hospitals that don't have Medicaid funding supporting them. So that's the hammer that's going to drop. And I think, again, my concern is I don't think as a state, West Virginia is going to be best equipped to handle that problem.
Goes back to you, David, for the final word. Please make it brief.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who voted for the leopards eating people's faces party and are now realizing that the leopards are going to eat their face. And, at this point, the fiscal storm's coming, and it's not just from government services. It's going to be your pocketbook, your ability to spend money, your ability to open a business, your ability to have the economic freedom that you currently have. And I think people need to prepare because it's going to get ugly, and it's not. No one's going to escape the economic storm except for maybe a few tech bros.
Issue number 3, Mr. John Gilstrap.
I want to shift gears and talk a little bit.
Thank you. Something uplifting.
Yes. Well, it's not that kind of show.
Not today, it isn't.
I want to talk about media issues. I'm really fascinated by what's going on, particularly with the Washington Post. A couple of days ago, Jeff Bezos posted, I'm reading this from his Twitter, he said this is what he sent to his staff. I'm writing to let you know about a change coming to our opinion pages. That would be for Washington Post. We're going to be writing every day in support and defense of 2 pillars, personal liberties and free markets. We'll cover the other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others. There was a time when a newspaper, especially one that was a local monopoly, might have seen it as a service to bring to the reader's doorstep every morning a broad-based opinion section that sought to cover all views. Today, the internet does that job. I am of America and for America and proud to be so, and then it goes from there. This has triggered a lot of resignations from the editorial staff, and this is on the heels of a few months ago when WAPO lost 300,000 subscribers because Bezos killed an endorsement for Kamala Harris for the presidency. And the issue here is that they're claiming that it's not unbiased reporting unless it can be biased reporting. Unless we are allowed to be a left-wing, the left-wing paper that we've always been, then somehow democracy is dying in darkness. So my question is, what does this say about the future or even the existence, if it has ever existed, of objective journalism? Is there such a thing? It's sort of the goal, but is it even a thing? Is it desirable? Has it ever existed?
Mr. Carl.
I can't wait to read the Washington Post and when they're promoting free markets. We'll see if they ever even had a clue or had the slightest understanding of the the importance of free markets and how they work. I mean, I grew up. The Washington Post, was in our home, and as soon as I figured things out, and it was my obligation to subscribe. I stopped the subscription because of their biased point of view, particularly against free enterprise. So that's going to be interesting to me if they're switching over to that perspective, if they even understand it in the first place, and I think that they do not understand it.
Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, will Mr. Bezos's change of the editorial page mean that because he's in favor of free markets, he will object to Elon Musk getting $38 billion of government money or $28 billion, I don't remember the exact number of billions, the federal money that launched all these big ventures that he's so admired for. I got a feeling, as a billionaire sycophant, Jeff Bezos is going to have nothing to say about the implications for the free market of the federal government handing Elon Musk $28 billion. And so that's just a lie. It's just, oh, I'm going to say I'm for free markets, but what I really mean, I'm for tax dollars for billionaires. And that's a lot different from free markets. So
in Bezos' defense, that divorce cost him a lot of money, Larry.
Yeah. And it's too bad the feds couldn't have bailed him out. Good Lord. He is just another billionaire guy who wants to be able to suck up to Donald Trump. And I would assume if we got a left-leaning president 3 years from now, he will go the other way. And what he is doing is destroying the credibility of what was one of the nation's leading newspapers. The guy before him certainly destroyed some of its credibility, but now he's shifted into high gear and he's flooring it.
Mr. Ferretti.
Well, I find this whole thing deeply hypocritical on Bezos's part. You know, after he lost 300,000 subscribers when they quashed the Harris endorsement, he came out and said, it's important for us to be independent sources of news. The perception of bias is something that we want to get rid of, so we're not going to endorse presidential candidates anymore. Now, that was in October. Now, since then, in just 4 months, this is a guy who flew down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring of Trump. He donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration. He paid $40 million for the Melania Trump documentary, which happened to be the most that the Amazon has ever paid any individual for a documentary, 3.5 times what anybody else proposed in terms of payment for such a documentary, because of course, we're all on the edge of our seats wanting to learn more about Melania.
I think they're trying to cut you off, Joe. The man's trying to squash your thought. Did we lose Joe? I think we did. I told you, you don't want to mess with these people. Mr. Valente.
Look, a lot of people who are welcoming this change were the same people who were telling us, decrying the fact that Facebook was, at Meta at one point, was declassifying or eliminating deplatforming the conservative voices during the election. I'm interested to see what Jeff Bezos's positions are on the free market and personal liberty. I'm willing to bet you that he is probably much more personal liberty being just personal for himself, and free market's just for Google or whatever company he's with. Like when it comes to what he's doing, I don't have a problem with it because he owns the paper. And he's right. For the most part, opinion is all over the place. You can find differing opinions wherever you want to.
And the newspaper is probably the last place you look for an opinion.
Yeah, newspaper. I mean, most people are just getting their stuff from clickbait headlines anyway. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's going to be a long-term successful business model for Jeff Bezos. I think I think that he has shot himself in the foot when it comes to the Washington Post, destroying its previous consumer base and trying to capture the MAGA Republicans to do it, but I don't think he's going to be successful doing that.
Joe, I have you back. I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap up your thought before I go back to John for a final thought.
Yeah, I got cut off, which is highly suspicious.
I say
in my mid rant. So I don't know what I got out of there, but I just thought the whole thing was hypocritical on Bezos's part. I'm having a hard time with these rich guys, getting box seats at the inaugural events in front of the cabinet people and currying a favor with Trump. I just think they're playing us all for suckers because they're in it for themselves. They're not in it for any altruistic reasons. That's how they became rich in the first place.
All right. You got most of your point across, Joe. I don't think that you missed, you didn't get cut off till the very, very end of that. John, final minute comes back to you.
Well, first of all, as far as people getting their knickers in a knot over the involvement of Jeff Bezos with Trump, let's not forget the involvement of Katharine Graham and Ben Bradley in the vaunted days of the Washington Post with all things Democratic. Okay, so it's good for the goose, good for the gander. Bezos is promising that this does not affect the reporting side of the paper at all, that it's strictly on the opinions page. I don't know if it actually affects the op-ed pages. I think it does, which is actually opposite editorial is what means. I just found that out yesterday. The question was really about objective journalism, and I don't think it does exist. I think we talked about this yesterday. I think people look for their teams. When you talk about having the Washington Post when you were a kid, we had the Washington Post and the Washington Star. Post came in the morning, Washington Star came in the afternoon. Post was liberal, Star was conservative-ish. So I think first of all, the democracy dies in darkness thing is stupid. I don't see anything wrong with this. I think there's a lot of people putting their faces on fire unnecessarily.
Nobody wants a sunburnt face, John. The peel on something like that's got to be terrible. All right, we got the Friday Five here together. Joseph Joey Torts Ferretti via telephone. Welcome back, Joe.
Oh, great to be back. And Rob, I got to say,
yes.
The WKRP
yes.
reference you made before, the funniest show that I can ever remember watching was where the quote was, "As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly."
That's right.
If you haven't seen that segment, I highly recommend it.
Thanksgiving 78.
It's probably available on YouTube.
It is.
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
The big guy, Gordon Jump. He was the general manager at WKRP, ran the place for his mother who owned it. And that was probably the most iconic line from that television show in its history. God is my witness. I thought turkeys could fly. And then Les Nessman saying, "Oh, the humanity," as the turkeys fell on their head. Oh, the humanity. All right, with the issue. And we also have John Gilstrap, Michael Carl, and David Valente here, too. And with issue number 4, Mr. Lawrence Schultz.
Yes, Mr. Trump has been very insistent that he will cut the federal deficit through the economic policy proposals of Elon Musk and Mike Johnson, the ones that they say they will implement, while simultaneously raising the debt ceiling by $4 billion. Trump ran all-time record deficits of $8.2 trillion in 4 years last time, which will mean that $4 billion debt ceiling raise will only last 2 years if we go along the same pace. Will Mr. Trump reduce deficits this time or set a new record? I want everybody on the record on this, and why.
Well, there's 2 parts to the deficit. The deficit, of course, is the annual hole in the budget, and then the debt is the cumulative amount of all the deficits. Are you asking, will he reduce the deficit and the debt, or just the deficit? Because you can still add to the debt while reducing deficit spending.
Well, I think it would be ridiculous to ask if he's going to pay off some of the federal debt. That ain't going to happen. I mean, if somebody wants to suggest that'll happen, go ahead. But the question is, will he run $8.2 trillion or some slightly lower number, in my view?
Jonathan Gilstrap.
First of all, I think it's important to note that we're still in Biden's budget right now. We're not spending Trump money. We're still spending Biden's money. So we need to raise the debt ceiling because we need to pay the bills, and you can't just stop the flow of Biden overspending with a valve. So raising the debt ceiling is just the thing to do. As far as the rest of the question is concerned, it's an expensive process to restructure the military from a social experiment to a true fighting force. It's expensive to take federal law enforcement from a social experiment and from a political organization back to a true law enforcement agency. These things are all going to be expensive. However, the administration has promised to cut trillions of dollars. And they're going to lower people's taxes. They've got all of these plans. What happens at the end? Again, it goes back to it's a binary choice. It will succeed, or the Republicans hand the Democrats the reins of power for decades. I don't know. I certainly hope he does. I hope he succeeds. I hope we all hope that he succeeds, because we need to stop the bleeding of money for our future generations.
On this, we can all agree, I assume. Mr. Valente.
Yeah, I mean, a $4 trillion increase to the debt ceiling is not a huge surprise that they're pushing this. Although they tried to hold us hostage on this a couple times over the last few years about raising the debt ceiling. Technically, we're not in. Well, we are in Biden's budget in a way, but it's a continuing resolution. We've been in continuing resolution for a long time now, essentially kicking the budget can down the road.
Good distinction.
However, this is going to be. We're not going to see the proposed savings, if ever. I mean, if he flips the switch and turns off all the federal government. We still have outlays right now that we still have to deal with, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all these items that need to be paid. We also have service on the debt that is expensive, and that is going to eat a larger proportion of our revenue that we bring in as we move on, as we surpass $38 trillion in debt. I think within the next 4 years, we'll probably be somewhere in the $45 million range of debt because of the service amount that's just going to start compounding. And
Trillion.
45 trillion, I'm sorry. It's hard to wrap your head around some of these numbers, but it's just the servicing, and then the debt that is based off of the outlays that are projected for decades to come is going to probably get closer to 200 million or trillion. Yeah.
I was watching a movie the other day from, I think it was a movie, I don't know, 20 years ago, and it showed the debt clock in New York City, the ticker, and at the time it was at $7 trillion, and I remember how everybody was so outraged at $7 trillion. Don't you wish you could go back to a $7 trillion deficit?
We're numb to it. Like
we realize if Trump does that in 4 years, he will have beaten his previous record.
Mr. Ferretti, by the way, as the clock continues to tick.
Well, the equation here, Larry, is on one side you have the expiring Trump tax cuts. And, of course, the people in charge in Washington want to keep those in place. So they're going to try to do a pay-for with cuts on the other side of the equation. Now, I keep hearing that, we're finding dead people collecting Social Security and dead people who are on the job and collecting a paycheck. Call me dubious or skeptical about whether or not there's going to be enough of that kind of fraud that's going to balance the books. And I don't think there's enough waste or abuse in the system that's going to balance the books on the Trump tax cuts. So they're going to be in a dilemma on how to make that equation work. And I would dare say that there's going to be some draconian cuts. There's going to be some Medicaid reform. They're going to say the military and Medicare's off limits. So they're really going to be in a small space in terms of what they can cut in order to balance the books on those tax cuts. And there's going to be a fracture in the Republican Party over this because some on that side want real deep cuts. They want debt paid for, and others who represent states like West Virginia know that they can't stomach those kind of cuts. So I see a lot of gamesmanship on the debt limit and the budget, and we're in for a real ride here coming up in the next few months.
Mike Carl.
Well, first of all, tax cuts across the board, income tax rate cuts raise the dollars that come into the government, and I have great confidence. And that's why I've supported him and still do, that the federal debt and the budgetary deficit will drop. I'm not saying it's going to be eliminated, in the end of this 4-year term, but it will be going down if Trump gets what he's asking for. And Musk and the Republicans keep control of both houses in the next election. I think the deficit will come down. I'm not saying it's going to get wiped out. There's no, it's just way beyond possibilities and the time frame. But it'll be headed in the right direction, which is down when Trump's 4 years are up.
If I may, I just looked this up. You were stumbling over the word trillion because it's a hard word to. If 1 trillion seconds, units of time, 1 trillion seconds is 31,688 years.
Yeah.
So.
Which is how long I feel like I've been doing this show.
Just this
Luckily,
segment.
we don't share that feeling about you, Rob.
Thank you, Larry. President Trump stated that there was a person who was 200 years old who was receiving Social Security yesterday or the day before. So I looked up when they started Social Security in the years 1935, and I looked up when the first check, which was for $22 and something cents, went out for Social Security. That was 1940. So giving the president the benefit of the doubt, 1935 as the starting point. If you were 100 years old in 1935, you would have been born in 1835, which is still not 200 years in the past. So you would have had to have been born at least 200 years ago to be 200 years old today. Social Security wasn't around.
It's almost before the country was created.
You couldn't. And I know people say, well, President Trump likes to exaggerate to make a point. That's great, except that people believe. There are people who believe everything he says is true. And they act on that. And then they go on social media, and then they start making attacks. There aren't any 200-year-old people who received Social Security because they weren't around when it was time to register, to be counted for Social Security. There's two different lists. Let me finish. There's two different lists for Social Security. There's the list of everyone who's ever had a Social Security number, and then there's a list of people who actually are receiving Social Security. And what Elon Musk found was the list of everyone who's ever gotten a Social Security number. And he said, wait a second, there's a 110-year-old person on here. Well, there's 125. Social Security stopped sending checks out to anybody over the age of, I think it's 110, automatically. 110 or 115, which it's one of those two numbers. So the list he found where he said, look at how much waste, fraud, and abuse there is on people getting checks illegally was incorrect. Much like the $8 billion savings he said he found when they further examined was $8 million was incorrect.
Yeah, and part of it is that.
By the way, somebody wanted me to rant today to keep my streak going. I don't know if that counts or not, but that's part of it.
But part of it is legacy code for computer systems, in that if you didn't have a year of birth, it defaulted to like 1875, old COBOL systems.
Which still isn't 200 years ago.
It still isn't 200 years ago. That's, they've been filtered out by either through, over 100-year list or whatever. They filter those people out. Again, the lies, damn lies, and statistics here where it makes a good headline that some 200-year-old person or 150-year-old person is getting benefits. I will tell you that one of the most shocking things when it comes to federal benefits was the last beneficiary of the Civil War and for VA benefits died in 2020.
That's pretty incredible.
The child of a 80-year-old guy had a child in the early 30s, and she lived to 2020. She was deemed helpless. VA pays for deemed helpless children until they pass away. There are.
We got to get to issue number 5, so make sure you wrap.
There are long benefit people in the system, but for the most part, when they get to the extreme age, they're heavily monitored. They're calling the nursing home for this woman like every week, just check, make sure she's still alive. Because it was, again, it's a link back to the Civil War, so it was a historical thing, but it was a VA benefit they wanted to track.
Larry, you get the final word, 30 seconds.
Yes. Mr. Trump, what we call exaggeration, is known by a much shorter and more accessible term, lying. Okay? And if he believes that stuff is true and is exaggerating it for some, then he's not just a liar, he's a stupid liar. Some of this stuff just isn't possible.
Be careful. When Joe went that way, they cut him off. Just be careful.
Yeah. Well, that may be the best thing for me.
Issue number 5, Michael Carl.
I'll make it quick here. We'll go back to the West Virginia situation. Do you agree that we need justice to at least stay 4 years in the Senate so that Morrissey can remain as governor and try to fix some of West Virginia's fiscal problems.
Finish out his full term is your point on that one,
Yes.
I guess, right? All right. All right, let's start first with Joe Ferretti via telephone.
Well, that would kind of depend on who would replace Morrissey if there is a switcheroo at the Senate level. But Mike, I don't see Jim Justice serving his full term as a U.S. senator. In fact, I've hardly heard of anything he's doing or any even press conferences or anything from him at all. I just wonder how much he's there. And the book's still out on Morrissey as to what his effectiveness is going to be for the state long term. We hear mixed signals. I was heartened by Ken Reed saying that when he spoke in Morgan County, it was all about economic issues. But he does seem to delve into other matters that are really not going to move the state forward, in my opinion. So book's still out on him yet.
Lawrence?
Yeah, I don't really see a working difference for the people of West Virginia between these two people. If they both left or if they both stay forever, I don't think anything is going to change. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily think that Morrissey hanging around or Justice hanging around will mean that Morrissey will become the senator, will leave and become the senator. He doesn't have to leave just because Justice isn't there anymore. He might, but I don't see a big enough difference between the two of them to really have it make a difference. And they're both so utterly wrong. I think we'd be better off if they both left and we just pick somebody at random to replace them.
David Valente.
I think the only functional difference between Justice and Morrissey is that Morrissey will probably show up and sit in his seat every once in a while. But whether he stays, how long Justice stays, I don't think it's going to be that long. I think he's going to get tired of the Washington rigmarole, and if things start going south as far as the government goes, he may bail out and allow Morrissey to name himself the replacement and move on to, both of them move on from their current positions.
Mr. Gilstrap.
I don't know where y'all get your data to draw these conclusions. I think Patrick Morrissey was a very effective attorney general for quite a while. Now he's a brand new governor. I don't know what to expect of him. If he in fact found $400 million shortfall that is truly a $400 million shortfall, and he truly found a way to fix it without rolling back the tax cuts and all of this, if he can truly do all of that, I think he's a genius. And yes, I hope he stays in office. If it's something other than that, I don't know. I don't have an opinion.
I would agree with you. I think he was an effective attorney general. I think there was a lot of concern when he took that position because of his background in D.C. and with pharmaceutical companies that he would go easy on settlements or ignore settlements with pharmaceutical companies. I think he proved that to be false. I thought he aggressively went after pharmaceutical companies to get opioid settlements. I also thought he went outside the box to take on the federal government with the waters. I can't remember what the exact name of that law was that allowed the state to draw more water from the Potomac. If you remember, Maryland got to restrict how much water West Virginia could take out from their side of the Potomac. Morrissey was the guy that got that reversed. And then
we talking about drinking water?
The amount of money you can draw from the Potomac on the West Virginia side was restricted.
Right.
Yes,
for drinking?
For use, any sort of use.
Oh, man.
That was restricted by the state of Maryland as to how much West Virginia could take out of the Potomac.
Yeah, because Maryland owns the river.
So he went to federal court and got that reversed, that West Virginia they can take out the amount of money, the amount of water that they need. No, McGraw didn't do that. Nobody else had done that. Morrissey did that. That obviously benefits Berkeley County tremendously as the Potomac
depending on how you filter the water.
Well, I mean, that's up to the county, right?
This is the Potomac, man.
That's up to but it's coming from the mountains, so it's a little cleaner as it comes by here.
Well,
we're not talking about the part that merges with the Anacostia, where there was raw sewage.
That which does not kill you makes you stronger.
That's
that
what
which
they
kills
say.
you doesn't matter anymore.
And how? So I don't disagree with you, John. I don't agree with Governor Morrissey's stance.
I've had stronger
on a few
endorsements
things.
than that. I don't disagree with you, but that's
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with everything that anybody says, but that part of Morrissey as an effective attorney general, I don't see any issue with that. Right? Do you, Mike?
No,
You're an
in
attorney.
fact, he led the effort that resulted in one of the most important cases and rulings of the U.S. Supreme Court in a long time is
EPA?
West Virginia versus the EPA,
Right.
And that was major for not just West Virginia but the whole country.
Do you remember what the gist of that was?
Yeah, it was whether the EPA. I can't remember this
Regulation,
the
right.
facts but whether they could make what effectively was substantive law,
Yeah.
and that hadn't been authorized by Congress, and that was the basic
That's
principle at issue there. The specific, application, I can't remember exactly what it was, but that was a big deal, and so he was a good attorney general for the state, and maybe he'll be a good governor certainly. But back to Larry's response on my issue. The idea of going back to your party's previous governors, Wally Barron, there'd be a good one. That's why I'm a Republican.
You got time for a comeback if you want it, Larry.
Look, we'll just watch and see what happens with the question that I asked, and we'll get our answer there.
Joe Ferretti, what your thoughts? You're an attorney. What were your thoughts on Morsi as an attorney general?
Well, I think he was amongst a cadre of attorney generals nationwide that were objecting to a lot of the initiatives from the Biden administration. In that respect, he was effective because the court system at the time, and that continues to be a little bit more conservative leaning at the higher levels, U.S. Supreme Court namely. So, it was working well. The Clean Power Act was the issue that he litigated on behalf of West Virginia, and it was a precursor to the reversal of the Chevron decision.
That's the word I was looking for, Chevron decision. Thank you. All right, gentlemen, we've got final thoughts coming up. I'm going to take you out here with Roy Rogers. Well, happy trails. Lighten the mood a little bit in the room from the gloom and doom depression of what you're all forecasting to come, or at least some anyway. Anyway, final thoughts. You get 8 seconds apiece. Final thoughts. We start with Joseph Ferretti via telephone.
Just so you know, there were a lot of people like Ken Reed who spoke to the legislature about vaccines, but to no avail.
Mr. Schultz.
Call your elected officials to ask them about your power bills and Medicaid cuts.
Mr. Valente.
There's no truth to the rumors that the $5 million citizens, gold card citizens, will be relocated to Trump Gaza.
Mr. Carl.
Ears are hanging in there, and they still got a shot if they win Saturday.
Not much of one, though, baby. Mr. Gilstrap.
Everybody take a deep breath, relax, have a good weekend.
It is 10 o'clock. The Dave Ramsey Show is coming up next. This is Talk Radio, WRR Martinsburg and TV 10, and we'll talk again in 70 short hours.